I'm back with Dan Thomas. Thanks for joining me, Dan. We're going to talk about the future of video game streaming. And this is kind of in association with a blog post that we've written, and it has the provocative title, The Last Console You'll Ever Buy. I'm going to put the link in chat so you can access that at your leisure. But yeah, it's the launch of new consoles. Xbox launched last week, PlayStation 5 launched this week. And it's been 7 years since the PlayStation 3, or since the PlayStation 4 rather, and the Xbox One first hit store shelves. So we were thinking, what's the next 7 years going to look like? And obviously that's a very difficult thing to fathom or to figure out. Nobody actually has a crystal ball. But there are some interesting trends that we thought were worth noticing and discussing. Chief among them, I think that the article talks about primarily, is this idea that consoles as we know them might not exist in the same form. So I think you can definitely expect the half-step console. We're very used to kind of Pro and the slim versions now. I'd be surprised if we didn't get one of those. But towards the tail end of this generation, based on trends in internet speed and in anticipated change of consumer behaviour, it might be that streaming platforms are taking a lot bigger share of the kind of gaming pie. And we're going to talk about it. Dan, have you ever streamed a game? You have, right? I think I've seen you stream a game.
I have, yeah. Not as much as I always intend to, but yes, I am familiar with the concept.
Have you ever played a game, Dan? Ooh. Yeah, interesting, aren't they? We should talk about those one day.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've had experienced streaming services, and they've varied from early on being like, how on earth is anybody supposed to play this, to the more recent efforts when I'm like, this is voodoo. I'm streaming a console quality game to my phone, and I actually even, I think it was Crackdown 3 on the Game Pass experience. I was playing it on the ferry to work. So that was
nice.
I can't imagine there are many people that have done that test. So yeah,
played Crackdown 3 on a ferry. That is a unique experience. That's a bucket list item right there.
Absolutely.
I mean, you talked about Game Pass, and it's worth talking about the major players, because one of the big things and one of the key indicators of this trend is the amount of straight up investment that's going into this space. So obviously Google have invested heavily in Google Stadia. That's part of their strategy, at least currently. We know what Google are like. They might kill it at some point, but for now at least it seems to be a key part of their plans. Amazon have announced Amazon Luna. I don't know if you've heard of Amazon. They're also one of the richest companies in the world. Jeff Bezos, he's got the money and he does what he wants with it. And recently Microsoft, you mentioned Game Pass, which is, Game Pass is already, I think, the start of a real paradigm shift in the way people purchase games. Because when you get Game Pass, you really have to understand how transformative it is. The idea of being able to access a huge library whenever you want is really amazing, and it just enables you to kind of try games that you would usually, maybe see on a store shelf, but be like, I can't really justify spending 40, 50, 60 or even 70 pounds nowadays on buying it to see if I like it and then bring it back. It just lowers those barriers to entry, and Microsoft have invested big in content. Their studio, obviously they have increased the number of studios they own quite dramatically, including their recent $7 billion acquisition of ZeniMax and Bethesda, which is still technically not closed, but seems like a done deal at this point. So yeah, all the big players, with the possible exception of Sony, although they do have PlayStation now, so they have at least some toes in this pool, are gearing up for this kind of streaming fight. It's going to be the Netflix versus Amazon Prime, but of games. And in that sense, I guess it feels like a matter of when rather than if. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would, and I think the biggest debate is how long and how feasible, because there are. I mean, to stream a AAA high quality 4K responsive gaming experience is no mean feat, and there is a reason why you'll pay hundreds of pounds for a games console, or even thousands of pounds for a highly capable PC. So and then to to do that at scale for a remotely connected audience is no mean feat. But as you've mentioned, there are some pretty big players figuring it out who they have the money to work out what works and potentially ride the curve of, as we know, kind of over time technology costs reduce, speeds increase. So yeah, I completely agree.
I think there's always people, when we talk about this, like it's people who disagree, and that's totally fine. Obviously, it is after all a matter of pure speculation. If we could actually predict the future, I'd be playing the lottery, not here doing this show. But there are a lot of people who think, well, I would never do that. Like, I would never change, and maybe you wouldn't. I think there are people, and the article uses this as a frame of reference. You think about the vinyl experience for music fans. You know, vinyl is the best way, empirically, statistically, to listen to music. It's the purest form, the way you can listen to music with the highest quality. But it involves kit, it involves expensive purchases, and it's something that collectors and hobbyists are prepared to do. But maybe the average music listener, you know, the man on the street, the person who plays infrequently or isn't that invested in, you know, the quality being the absolute maximum it could be, those people are the people that we expect to transition to this over a long period of time as well. Like, you know, when we talk about this, we're not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. I think most of these services are a long way from being mass market successes. There's no real household name yet, but I think that 7 years is a really long time. It's such a long time in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of, you know, how long it takes people to adopt things. Because I think when you think about Spotify and Netflix and other things that have done this in similar industries, or even something like the Amazon Kindle, like they have that kind of ramp up time, and then they almost kind of explode at a certain point, where usually at the point where the price becomes mass market equitable, it becomes something that everyone's like, well, that's obviously better than what I'm doing. I'm paying for things individually like an idiot. What am I doing? Why would I be spending this much money on one thing when I could just have all the things? And I think that's probably the point at which this becomes a reality, and that's why I think Game Pass is in a really strong position, assuming they can, you know, make it work technically, because they already have arguably the best subscription-based library in the business. And obviously that's something that the others are going to challenge. It's something that Ubisoft are already starting to gear up for their own channel. They're working with Amazon. It's something that Google Stadia is already attempting to challenge. So yeah, fascinating times for the industry at large, and hopefully we'll get to look back on this in 7 years and be like, man, we totally called it.
What is also, I think, really interesting is you're mentioning consumer behavior, and you know, the best, objectively the best gaming experiences do require that premium kit, and that is out of reach to a lot of people. And we've discussed before, and I don't know the exact figure, but we're essentially saying in Western markets, kind of 50% of all people are now playing games to some degree, whether that's Facebook games, mobile games, or sort of core game experiences. And the reason the Facebook and mobile games are such a contributing factor to those numbers is because of the accessibility. You know, everybody has a phone, everybody has a web browser, so you can try things and get familiar with them. And the correct implementation that we eventually reach of game streaming kind of it lowers that barrier to entry, and we can start to present core game experiences to a broader audience. But that will also be interesting then to see the knock-on effect that has on how games are made. And you know, the biggest games rely on known behaviors, and all of a sudden we're going to be introducing an audience who don't have those. They don't know that typically this button jumps and minimaps do this, and you know, they aren't familiar with those conventions, which in turn is going to have an impact on the game experience that gets developed to make a better onboard. It's kind of like going back to introducing these concepts again to this new audience. So that would be really interesting.
Neither of them utilize, you know, cloud streaming technology, but I think, and it's an interesting parallel with, you think about some of the breakout hits of this year, specifically things like Among Us and Genshin Impact. Like, those are both games that are hyper accessible, like they're free to play on a phone. You can just get into those if you want to. The barrier to entry is so low, and that's I think where bigger games want to get. And there's been an increasing, not just in the way they're delivered, but in the way that they're designed, an increasing trend towards games having a lower barrier to entry, and free-to-play is a huge part of that. You look at things like Fortnite, like the next Halo is supposed to have free-to-play multiplayer in it, and if you go back in time to the release of Halo 3, and you told people, hey, they're going to give probably the best bit of the game away for free, they would have thought you were crazy. But it's the times we live in now, and there's so much competition for people's attention and eyeballs and time that if your barrier to entry is high, you're just essentially screwing yourself out of potential revenue. Obviously, there's lots of ways to monetize, and not all of them are great. But first and foremost, you need to have people actually play your game or engage with it in some way to be able to reach the point at which they can, make a transaction with you or subscribe to what you're offering. Yeah. The article is up on etchuk.com/play. You can see it there. It's called The Last Console You'll Ever Buy. Give it a read. The show's nearly over, so you can go there and read it shortly. And if you like it, share it on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever, talk about it. And you can always tweet us as well. We're on Twitter at etchplay. Dan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate you doing double duty on the stream today.
Quite all right.
And we'll be back next week at the usual time of 4 p.m. If you're watching us live on Twitch, then make sure you don't miss it, because you can just follow right now. It's down there. A little button. It's purple. It says follow on it. Just press it, and then you'll get notified when we go live next. If you're watching the catch-up on YouTube, that's okay. You're busy. I get it. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, and then you'll see us in your feed as well. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Keep waving out to the music.
Yep, hit it. My hand looks massive.